For the past 12 months, I've been working to build all of Breath of the Wild in Minecraft. And so far, we've completed some fan-favorite locations like Gerudo Village and Zora's Domain. This outlined region includes everything that we've completed thus far, but today I want to knock out the entire bottom right corner of the map. We'll move out from the Great Plateau, completing the Bridge of Hylia and the Lake Tower as we move deeper into Faron. We'll finish the Zonai Ruins and Lake Floria, where a great dragon looms over the waterfalls. And finally, further to the east, we'll end off with Eventide Island and Lurelin Village. Lurelin? I don't know. Also, at the end of this episode, I'm going to share with you guys my plans for the rest of the series and when I think I can finish the whole map. But enough of all that, let's get started on the Faron region. A little south of the Great Plateau is Lake Hylia, with a great bridge crossing the waters. I decided that it would be best to start with the Bridge of Hylia and follow the path as it goes deeper into Faron. After figuring out where each end of the bridge would be, I quickly connected the sides, getting the basic line and structure of the bridge complete, which was more of a pain than you would think it would be. But before I continued structuring the actual bridge, I worked on the gatehouse. Either end has an identical gatehouse with two towers on either side, one of them being well known for the spot where Link's cell shading disappears. I used mangrove planks to give the roof a bit of a red tint. It's a lot more dulled in Breath of the Wild than it is in the Minecraft map, but it's the best match I could find. But nevertheless, I continued to add a lot of the smaller details with the help of one of the new builders, Goat. After that, it was time to start work on the actual bridge. The Bridge of Hylia has a large spherical point in the middle, but looking at the Breath of the Wild map, you can see that it's actually an octagon, not a circle. Because of the weird angle of the bridge, it was really hard to make it octangular. Is that a word, octangular? The design that I came up with does look spherical, but it's technically kind of an octagon. Just take my word for it, okay? After that, I began to work on the large support pillars that hold up the bridge, which were very odd because they had a sort of pointed end, but again, because of the angle of the bridge, it was really hard to make it look right. The design I came up with does look a little bit janky, but it's the best I could get. I tried to space out all the pillars equally, but that proved to be a lot harder than it would seem to be. Without the main support beam in the middle of the bridge, it was very hard to figure out if it was properly spaced out or not, so I went to build that up first. It has a very square design with a bit of an arch in the middle, but overall, designing it was quite a breeze. After that, I tried once more to evenly space out all of the pillars. I did get it right eventually, but it was still very difficult because, I don't know, I'm stupid. But finally, with that very annoying task out of the way, I was able to design the top of the bridge. I added the darker spots on top of each of the pillars, with a line of copper stairs to give a bit of indent to the bridge that connect up all of the dark spots together. I added the fountain and other smaller details in the center of the bridge, before I copy and pasted the finished side of the bridge to the other. Then, as the last task for the Bridge of Hylia, I began to sort of ruinify it as I have with a lot of other builds throughout this project. I tore down pillars, punched holes in the bridge, and mixed in a lot of cobblestone, cracked, and mossy stone bricks to make the bridge look very old and worn down. But with that, the Bridge of Hylia was complete. Across the bridge sits the Lake Tower, which really does not have much to it. I had to do some minor terraforming to the region and add in some small enemy camps. Apart from that, this whole region south of the bridge does not have much to it. I put in the Highland stable and its nearby shrine, which now is a good time to mention. Even though all the stables are identical, I do change the wool colors a bit to give each stable its own unique flair. Way far south close to the shoreline, however, is the Horse God Fountain. Now, this is identical to every other fairy fountain except for its color, so I was able to copy and paste the one that I built near Gerudo Village and change it to a much darker purple. I also added some large mushrooms behind the fountain and some lily pads in the small ponds. Despite the general emptiness of this region, a little further to the east were the first fragments of Zonai Ruins. I put in place this small forest which sort of acts as the gateway into Zonai territory. In this forest, the ruins begin, with what appears to be the remnants of some sort of old gateway. There are 2 large towers on either side, one of them almost completely torn down, with fallen walls that presumably used to stretch much further into the wilderness. Next to one of the Sheikah shrines is a large dragon head. It was pretty challenging to get the head to look right, but luckily it's pretty much exclusive to this area, so we don't ever have to look at it again. There were more similar ruins further down the path, most of it just being the same tower and wall designs in different areas. Southeast of this forest, however, there's a much more open plain with a lot more ruins. There are multiple square structures like the one you're seeing here, the first one I built being the largest of them all. This sparse woodland has a lot of the large green towers that you can find all over Hyrule, which I decided to use oxidized copper for. Many of these large structures were built across this area, each of them being more ruined than the last. That pretty much wraps up this region south of Lake Hylia. It sort of just acts as a connecting point between the Faron region and the lake. The Faron region is home to a densely packed jungle littered with the ruins of the Zonai people. I decided that it would be best to start off with the large jungle trees that cover the entire region. There are 2 main types of trees in the Faron region, both of them being very similar. The only main difference between the 2 is their height. I started off with one of the small trees, using stripped jungle wood and packed mud for the trunk. These trees have very thick trunks with large droopy leaves to create the canopy. For the first tree that I built, I had 3 layers of leaves, the bottommost layer drooping down the farthest while the top layer sort of sticks up. Because of the symmetrical design of these trees, I didn't vary the leaves too much, so the biggest difference between all the trees are the trunks. After I made these 3, however, I still had to build large trees, which are pretty much just the same thing, except, well, they're bigger. I did make the trunks for the larger trees darker though, opting for a mixture of jungle wood and mangrove wood instead of the packed mud and stripped jungle wood. I thought that these would take a lot longer to build and that I would really struggle to make them look right, but I honestly kinda nailed it on my first attempt, and I really love how these trees turned out. Moving down below, it was time to move our way up the dragon-shaped river, building our way towards the Spring of Courage where the large dragon head rests. There are a lot of ruins to complete in this area. For this region, I decided to put in all of the trees last instead of at the beginning. I figured that it would be easier to build all of the ruins without the massive jungle trees in the way. Plus, it makes it easier for you guys to see. I started off with this massive enemy camp that pretty much blocks the entrance to the Zonai Ruins. I was struggling, however, to make the massive skull that sits atop the tower, but luckily, Ombrains was around and she was able to get it done. Some of the first ruins that I built up were the dragon head stone carvings. I forgot to record at first, of course, but I did remember in time to finish it off. Continuing along the road, there were a lot more of the snake-like dragon carvings, as well as some of the large towers that we built earlier. The path opens up a lot more further down the road, however, revealing these large stone walls embedded in the cliffs. These walls have a repeated pattern and also show up near the Spring of Courage. They also had large roots hanging down all over the top of them, which I used mangrove roots and wood for. In the area as well is one of the large enemy encampments that is posted up on a tree, but this one was a new variant exclusive to the Faron region. This same design is duplicated all across the Faron region, and there's even one on Eventide Island, which you'll see later. As the path to the river begins to thin out, there are a lot more of the dragon head carvings looming over the road. These were all the same design though, and they were copy-pasted everywhere in Breath of the Wild, so the only thing that I was really changing about them was how ruined they are compared to the others. The river itself also has many of these hanging above, some of them even breaking away and falling into the river. At the end of the river, there are 2 wooden bridges that connect the path to the other side of the lake, with the land across acting as the home to the Spring of Courage. The same large walls that we designed just a moment ago also show up here. Similar to the one we built before, these walls also have the large roots hanging over them. As a lot of you probably know, the entrance to the Spring of Courage is a massive dragon head. This was certainly not going to be an easy build. Logically, I started with the jaw while I attempted to figure out the proper scale for this build. The teeth were pretty weird to make, and in general, the early bits were quite a struggle. I'm sure that you can see as we progress on the snout that there was a lot of trial and error for this one. Luckily though, Sierra and Goat were there to help me. We continued to progress on the dragon, adding the large swirls that line the back of the head. But after we finished the first half of the head, it got a lot easier and there wasn't as much to do along the backside. This was quite an interesting build because I almost never build dragons, or large stone statues for that matter. It's not a skill that I thought I had, I wasn't sure I'd be able to pull it off, but I think in the end it looks pretty good. But there is still one part of the dragon we have left to build. On either side of the dragon head are two massive claws, and if there's anything that artists have taught me, it's that hands are not easy to make. But thankfully, by some miracle, I was able to construct the claws with almost no difficulties. Somehow I was just able to make the claws look great on my first try. And luckily, the two claws are identical. I was able to just copy paste this claw to the other side and only had to make minor changes to it. And finally, it was time for the actual Spring of Courage. Behind the dragon head, I carved out the small pond and the pedestal that the goddess statue sits upon. For the goddess statue itself, I was able to reuse the one that I built at the Temple of Time. And to end off the Zonai Ruins, I did a bit of texture variation, adding a lot of cracked and mossy stone brick to the mix, along with some tuff and cobblestone to give it all some darker patches. And finally, to finish off this area, it was time to put in place all of the trees that we built earlier. And this final step really brought the whole build together. I am just so amazed with how well this turned out. This area quickly rose to potentially my favorite spot that we've built so far. Continuing east along the path, we are quickly approaching Lake Floria, the place that the great dragon Farosh often wanders in. Before we can get far east to work on Lurelin Village and Eventide Island, we first have to finish this region. After finishing the Zonai Ruins, I began to extend the jungle farther east. What we just built around the Zonai Ruins is only a fragment of the entire jungle. As I put all of the trees in place, Sly worked on one of the bridges along the path, while Toby terraformed the riverbed. Goat was also helping to build more of the Zonai Ruins along the path. The Zonai Ruins extend all the way to Lake Floria. They just become more sparse the further you get from the Spring of Courage. I was also helping to build some of the ruins, constructing the first of the owl statues. There are many of these owl statues scattered throughout Lake Floria, despite none of them being near the bulk of the Zonai Ruins. The statue turned out pretty well. It doesn't necessarily look like an owl, but on this scale, it's kinda hard to replicate that. Far up on the cliffs above is the Faron Tower. This tower is sprinkled with a bunch of small-scale Zonai Ruins, but none of them are that crazy. Most of it is either copy-pasted from a previous spot, or is something pretty small that's not really noteworthy. A little ways down the hill are some more unique ruins though, but really they're just kind of small-scale versions of the walls that sit beside the Spring of Courage. Just to the east, however, we make it to the Lake Region. This place is well known as the home of farosh, and for the many great waterfalls that tumble down into Lake Floria. You may notice as I begin to clean up the terrain and put the waterfalls in place that the nearby cliffs are all red. Similar to Lineru's blue cliffs in the last episode, the cliffs surrounding Lake Floria have a red tint to them. Toby, Ombrains, and I decided on a palette that includes blocks like stripped acacia wood, brown mushroom blocks, and terracotta. On the other side of the lake is another stable, which is surrounded by more Zonai Ruins. However, most of it is torn from the ruins we've already made. A lot of the Zonai Ruins are just copy and pasted. Which becomes very relevant for these next couple clips. There are mini Zonai structures and enemy encampments scattered all across these red cliffs. but none of it is significant enough to spend much time on. Again, a lot of it is just copy and pasted from earlier, so here are a few wide shots of me putting in most of it. I also noticed that the lake was missing a bunch of its smaller islands, so I quickly put those in place, which really were just rocks that barely poke above the water. Finally, we have to build the very large curved bridge that crosses the lake. This was a bit of an interesting build, because not only is it the first bridge we've built in this map that sort of curves, but it also changes in elevation as it goes along. It was still pretty standard though until we got to the support beams. The bridge is held up by 3 large, ancient trees. For some reason I really struggled with these. It took 2 or 3 attempts to get the tree trunk to look right. Mostly because the trees have very large roots which scatter in all directions, but those are kind of hard to implement on this scale. But eventually I got a pretty good draft. So after finishing up the trees, this region is pretty much done. Except for the trees, of course, we still have to put those in place. Similarly to the Zonai Ruins, this whole area came together as soon as the jungle was put in place. I'm very glad that I waited to put in the trees until the end because wow, it just completely changes the area. Wait a minute, aren't I forgetting something? Oh yeah, we still have to build Farosh in its new home. In all my years of playing Minecraft, I only ever built 2 dragons, and both of them sucked. So Farosh was going to be quite the challenge for me. But luckily I had Goat here to help me alongside Hyrath, who built all of Nadra in the last episode. Choosing a block palette for Farosh was pretty challenging. I was very worried at first that the white would not look good in the end, but we stuck with it and that ended up being the right decision. While Hyrath was working on Farosh's underbelly, me and Goat were working to put in all of the glowing green spikes that stick out of Farosh's back. This was when I first began to truly appreciate frog lights, because being able to use a green light block in this build was very helpful. After that, Hyrath began to work on Farosh's head, using the head of another dragon that he built as a base for it. Farosh has a sort of stone gray snout with purple eyes, and a large green horn. The horn you see now would later be changed to better match a green color. As he finished up the head, I began work on the legs, which were a real pain. Getting the length and angle of them was very tough, but luckily Hyrath was there to give me plenty of pointers on how to make them look right. Finally, once the legs were finished, I began to add in a lot of the glowing green veins that cover Farosh's body, while Hyrath stitched the head onto the body. I think we did a good job. I was very worried about the white block palette at first, but wow, I think it turned out phenomenal. Ugh, there's a hair in my mouth. I'm just trying to do my voiceover. Get out. This episode is still far from complete. Further to the east, there's still a bunch of territory we need to build up, including Lurelin Village and Eventide Island. Let's build our way to Lurelin Village and end off the episode with Eventide Island. First up on the road is the Three Brothers Shrine Quest. If you recall, there's a shrine quest in Breath of the Wild that requires you to steal 3 shrine orbs from 3 Hinoxes. As you can see, I built up the shrine area first with the large ribcage coming out of the ground behind it. We already built these kind of bones in the last episode at the Lanayru Tower, so I was able to just reuse those here. I put the Hinoxes in place and all of the bones surrounding them, along with their own lakes and trees. Oh, and by the way, when I say first thing on the road, I mean the last thing on the road. This is pretty much the only significant thing between Lake Floria and Lurelin Village. There were a couple shrines and enemy camps that I had to put in place, and this very large overhanging cliff, which I learned something very funny about. This giant overhanging rock you saw me just put in place is completely stolen from Hateno. Obviously, Breath of the Wild is going to reuse some designs like the Sheikah Towers, some ruins, but I did not know until I was building this that they literally reused entire cliffs. They do it on the beach as well. Speaking of the beach, however, there is still a lot of work to be done to them. Before we begin work on Lurelin Village, we need to build up the palm trees for one thing, but the water's edge is also scattered with enemy camps. I've never really built any large-scale palm trees before, so this was kind of a first for me. My first attempt was not going too well, as you could see. I did not like it at all, so the next day I came back to try again. Slowly, each attempt was getting better, and this time, Monoshish came along to help me with the trees. We each built our own tree, but worked together to build the third one with Goat. I began to scatter the palm trees all across the beach, stretching all the way from the Necluda Sea to the Faron Sea. But it's over such a wide area that I can't even show you guys in replay mod, so here's just the raw footage of me putting it all in place. The shoreline is also scattered with a bunch of large dark rocks, so I went along the entire shoreline adding in a bunch of these. Upon some of these rocks were large enemy camps, which if you recall, these are copy pasted from earlier by the Zonai Ruins. Finally though, with all else finished, it's time to work on Lurelin Village. This beachside village is a fan favorite to many, however it is also very small. There is not much to build here. As I began to lay out the buildings for Lurelin Village, Monoshish began to work on some of the docks while Goat worked on the entrance gate. As you can see from the layouts though, there are not many buildings in this village, and most of them are identical to each other. There are only 3 unique house designs in this village. It wasn't long before I got started on the first of the houses, using a mixture of different wood blocks like dark oak, spruce, jungle, and even a slight bit of acacia and birch. The coolest part about these buildings, in my opinion, are the palm trees that stick out of the roofs. I don't know why, but it was just so cool to be able to put the palm tree in place when the house was done. This house design is the most common in the village, appearing 4 separate times. So after finishing the first, I copy and pasted it into all of their locations. Jumping into the second house design, this one is a lot different from what we just made. It's almost shaped like a... I don't know, I'm not even gonna try and guess what shape this is. Its roof is very curved with 2 palm trees sticking out of this one instead of just the one, and overall I'm happy with how this design turned out. Jumping inside, me and Goat finished out the interior for this building. I did also make the interior for the other house we made, but it was pretty small and not very noteworthy. Moving on to the final house design, this one is sort of shaped like a boat and is infamous for having the very difficult Korok puzzle on top of it. But really guys, it's not that hard. I used an octo balloon and it took me like 20 seconds. You guys are making it more difficult than it is. This build was quite interesting. Me and Toby worked on it for about 2 hours. Because it was built at a 45-degree angle, it was pretty challenging to get the ship shape done properly. As I begin to work on the interior of this building, you can get a few glimpses of the banners that Goat designed. As it turns out, she's like a master at making banners, so she was able to make very accurate banners for this village. This building is the gambling room and is packed full with books and other small trinkets. Moving back outside, all of the buildings for this village are done. Goat, Toby, and I began to work on a bunch of the smaller details, including barrels, benches, trees, pretty much everything else. We finished up the docks, all of the entrance gates, and the small boats around the area, including the large pen, which I didn't even know was here until I built this. To finish off Lurelin Village, I mixed in a bunch of grass with the sand, as the area around here is actually fairly grassy. Or should I say, Grazzy. Please don't unsubscribe. Finally, we made it to the final stop of the episode, Eventide Island, a small island in the far corner of the map, with some enemy camps, ruins, and a Hinox. I first began to clean up the island a little bit, changing the stone colors, adding in some sand, and putting in trees. But of course, in typical Grazzy fashion, I forgot to record me putting in place most of the trees. All of the builds here were pretty small though, as the enemy tree camp is copy-pasted from earlier in the Faron region, as the same with the Hinox. Everything else was pretty minor, like a campfire on the beach, and a feasting spot on a small hill. There were some ruins higher up the island though, but there wasn't anything that special about them. I also put in the shrine way up on the top of the island. In this final shot, I began to put in a lot of the tall grass and flowers around the island, and despite this island not having too many builds on it, I still think it turned out really pretty. I really like this island. But with the island finished, we have completed the Faron region. With the Faron region complete, we have knocked out the entire bottom right corner of the map. This area of the map has quickly become one of my favorite places we've built so far. In the next episode, we will move past back across Lake Hylia, tackling the Gerudo region and completing Divine Beast Von Naboris with Gerudo Town. So, you should definitely subscribe if you don't want to miss that. For the rest of the series, I plan to loop counterclockwise around Central Hyrule before moving in to complete Hyrule Castle for the final episode. If all goes according to plan, we will finish this project by the end of the year. So far, there has been a 3-month long wait for each episode, but for the rest of the series, I plan to shave that down to 2 months by increasing my productivity. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.